Hang on. Good evening and welcome to CFI Insider. My name is Melissa Myers and I am the National Field Organizer for Center for Inquiry and your host for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Tonight we'll be joined by Jennifer Beahan, our Executive Director of CFI Michigan, and Julia Henshaw, a certified therapist whose specialty is recovering from religion. This is a special branch takeover edition of our program. As you may know, CFI has a number of branches and affiliates across the country and around the world. This evening is going to offer a glimpse of the type of programming that they have at CFI Michigan and at many of our other branches around the globe. You can learn more about CFI groups at centerforinquiry.org/about/locations. That's going to bring up our map that'll allow you to see the various locations that are in your area and get a look at what kind of programming that they have going on at any given time. During this program, you can use the chat function to ask questions of our presenters. We hope that this evening's program will serve equal parts enlightenment and catharsis. And right now, I am pleased to introduce Jennifer and Julia. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us this evening. I hear that the two of you have a very interesting way that you met one another when you first sort of started coming into secular life. Could you tell us some more about that?
Okay, sure. So to begin with, when I started college, my husband was doing a dual degree in theology and social studies with a plan to become a pastor. And so I was majoring in music education and thinking that I could teach music until we had kids and then help out as a church musician. And about halfway through, we were both at Christian universities here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was going to Cornerstone and he was going to a college called Grace Bible College in Wyoming. And we ended up deconverting halfway through our career there after we learned about critical thinking and this guy named Aristotle and this guy named Plato. And we thought, wow, that sounds kind of important. We've never heard of that before. And actually, it was our introduction to philosophy of education class that really started us down that road. So after some personal research, we ended up deciding that we were leaving the faith. And I ended up starting volunteering at the Free Thought Association. And we were attending meetings there regularly. And then very quickly after I graduated, I was asked to be on the board. And so I ended up in a leadership role fairly early on, and then over time became a staff person, and then took over as the executive director in 2018. During that time, I helped book our lectures, and I had, we have a lot of local colleges here that we search from, and Julia's husband, ex-husband now, actually spoke at one of our lectures, and then shortly after that, we ended up going, Julia's dad was my husband's theology professor in college. And so even though, well, his college professor didn't know that he was an atheist at the time, but we got invited to go to a reception at the school for his retirement. And I think that's where I saw Mike, and then I met Julia, and Jeremy was like, oh, this is Julia Henshaw. And I was like, why does this guy look so familiar to me? And then shortly thereafter, I found out that Julia was no longer a believer either, but I will let her tell that part of the story.
Yeah, I will tell that part of the story. Thanks, Jen. My name is Julia Henshaw. I am a licensed clinical social worker, licensed in both Michigan and Tennessee. I'm currently based in Nashville, Tennessee. And I do therapy all day, every day, and I love it. So I'll just back up a minute and tell you a little bit about my story quickly here. I was raised on the campus of Bible College in Wyoming, Michigan. And my dad was a professor of theology there, and my mom was a music minister and taught music and was very involved in the music department there at the Bible College. So I kind of grew up on the compound, as I'd like to say, but just disclaimer, there were no guns. It's just, on the compound. So then, I kind of grew up in that closed system didn't really know anything about life outside of that system or how to operate in life outside of that system, or that there was any other way of being or acting in the world. Left Bible college, and our work trajectory took us to many different places. We moved 7 or 8 different times, spent some time in Australia, lived there for 3 years. And so with each of these moves, I kind of saw a different way of life, a different ethical system. And then we came back from Australia. I was 33 at the time, had 2 kids, wanted to finish my degree. So I was going to finish it in music education. But I decided to just enroll in one course to get my feet wet, and that was an ethics course. So the moving around, seeing the different ethical systems, now in my ethics course, like that gave me the vocabulary for everything that I was kind of thinking and wondering about and processing through. It gave me a formal way of thinking about those kinds of issues. And my sort of formal deconversion process happened in the course of that ethics class. And so then I was in the process, or in the spot of, now what do I do? What do I do now that I don't know anything about anything anymore? Everything's kind of been torn apart in my belief system. So I went back and finished my undergraduate degree in philosophy as a means to kind of rebuild what I thought and kind of have agency over my own way of thinking about what my own value system and ethical system was. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of my deconversion that happened about 34, or when I was 33 or 34. And since then, it's been a continuous process of sort of deconstructing a lot of the old ways of thinking that still creep in and cause different kinds of problems in my own life at this point. Old ways of thinking and being that are just not really healthy, and I'm still trying to work on. So then 3 or 4 years ago, I finished my LMSW degree, and really with an eye toward wanting to do recovery from religion work. And so I kind of specialized in that, and most of my work there was tailored toward research projects on that, and just kind of really understanding the issues that occur when one deconverts and kind of goes through that new process of forming and establishing a new identity. So it's been an interesting process, but I've been really, really glad to be able to have the freedom that I know that many folks feel when they are finally able to sort of have this agency over their lives. So yeah, that's absolutely my story in a nutshell.
Plus, you get to help people over that sort of threshold, make that transition into just a new life, which has got to be its own sort of reward in and of itself. Yeah.
It's incredibly rewarding. The work that I do is, I just feel so fortunate to be able to, and honored to be able to walk alongside folks in this process that can be really, really painful and difficult, but also incredibly liberating and incredibly satisfying for them. So yeah, it's an honor and a joy to be a part of that process in individuals' lives.
That's amazing. Well, I'm very pleased to welcome you and Jen, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. So right now I've opened the chat up so that everybody can sort of converse. This is a little bit of a special program this evening. We want you to be able to get a chance to speak to each other about your experiences, and as well as ask questions sort of as we go along. So just because this is sort of a topic that I think is best served when we get a little unity, you know. So let's have a great conversation this evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really interested. Let's see what everyone has to say.
Oh, one thing though, I think would be helpful though, if you have a question that you would like any of us to answer, put that in the Q&A function rather than the chat, so that it doesn't get buried. I, having helped moderate a couple of these other ones, that's a helpful feature. So one thing I forgot to mention that I found very interesting in my leadership roles with CFI is I have ended up having to or needing to step into a pastoral role in my position at CFI. And it's really strange that I was planning to be a pastor's wife and ended up almost becoming an atheist pastor on the flip side. And so it's really interesting. And so with Julia's background, we've actually worked together to put together trainings for helping therapists be better about being accommodating to secular individuals and some of the specific concerns that they address. And I know that that has been an issue that has been really rewarding both for her, and it's been very helpful to me as well. Because I think one of the things that we forget when we leave religion is that we still are a part of the culture and the traditions in which we were raised. And that was one of the motivating things behind why we decided to do this event. And I know that this year there are some extra layers of stress and expectations because of the ongoing pandemic. But we're going to start off as a more general approach to things that are the more timeless struggles that we all face with families and traditions and around the holidays. And then towards the end, we will touch on a couple of special specific things that people might be facing this year due to the pandemic. So.
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quick a second and kind of, I appreciate that you said that, Jen, about the fact that you find yourself in a pastoral role now. And I think it's really important to honor and recognize that a lot of the talents and skills and abilities that were kind of morphed into a definition in one system can also be carried over and redefined in another system. And that process of the redefinition is really important, even when it comes down to like issues like we're talking about tonight, like the redefinition of how you used to celebrate your holidays and how that translates over now, carrying over some of the things that were very important, but just kind of giving it a new focus, a new definition, and new understandings behind it.
Absolutely. I think that when folks just have that expectation, you know, they're looking for someone who has like that little bit of spiritual authority, maybe. And when, you know, in secular organizations, normally we're not really set up in that way, but there are always these moments where people in leadership roles become that spiritual guide. So I'm already seeing some really great questions in here from our friends who have joined us. And the first one is from Dr. Baca, who asks, do you find that folks who are raised in narrow religious structures suffer from the same psychological issues that addictive folks have, like a hole in the soul type of a feeling?
That's an interesting comparison.
Yeah.
Yes, in some ways, yes. I mean, I think the experience of it could be very similar to the experience of an addiction where you need or are used to, in the case of leaving religion, you're used to needing someone or something to tell you what and how to be, and constantly needing that thing in your life to guide or order it or kind of rule and lead what you're doing in your life. And without it, you feel a sense of, well, who am I now? How do I go about having agency over my life? How do I make my own decisions in this case now? How do I run my life when I don't have that organizing principle anymore? Yeah, very similar experience in many ways.
Well, I think it's also important to recognize that the level of religious experience varies a lot from person to person. And that's one of the biggest contrasts that I've seen as a secular leader is you have everything from what some people call cradle atheists. They're raised in a secular family. Both of their parents are either nominally non-religious or vocally non-religious. And so, you know, their process of approaching religion and also cultural and traditional holidays is through a completely different filter than those people like myself and Julia, who were actually raised in very fundamentalist type religious structures. I mean, I was at my church growing up. I was there at least 3 or 4 days a week. I was also homeschooled for religious reasons. So my bubble, like Julie was talking about the bubble and being very isolated. Some people when they are leaving religion, they have a very sheltered view that the process for them of leaving religion can be much more traumatic than others who maybe were the Easter and the Christmas Catholics, or they're Jewish, but they're not, they're culturally Jewish, not practicing. And I know that it really ranges across the board. But I think when we were talking about how to start this conversation, that actually was one of the things that we discussed, that people, when they start to think about holidays, they forget to look at what they had, whether it was a religious tradition or a cultural tradition for holidays. And so we need to take the time to analyze that, both from how was it then, how is it now, and what did we like about that, or what did we not like about that? And only when you do that can you decide what you want a particular holiday to mean for you. And I think that it's actually not unlike the grief process in many ways. And I think that's a really important thing for each person. This is something that has to be an individual thing, because our experiences are so different. That we really need to take the time. Anybody who's been through any significant length of time of therapy will recognize this process of, identifying the situation, finding out where you're getting stuck, where you need, what direction you need to go, and finding coping skills. Which the coping skills in this arena are nice, right? You get to decide how you want to make the holidays your own, make the traditions your own. And use that as a way to navigate your way through life. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Jen, 100%. I think the idea of kind of when we are in the process of figuring out, what am I going to do with this holiday now that I'm an atheist? If you have come through a deconversion process, when we leave that religion, our lives become about redefining ourselves and reconstructing our identity and returning to an identity that always was who we were. We just weren't sure and weren't in contact with it before. But we make our own choices here. And that's an important piece of the recovery process. So we're working on becoming comfortable with our own agency and attending to our own grief with self-compassion. I mean, these are all things that we're doing as we come out of religious context and into the secular life and trying to navigate how to live that. And so the holidays can really be a part of that process when we bump up against these expectations of family members, for instance.
Yep.
There's an opportunity to establish for yourself here to establish what your goals and traditions and desires are at this time of year, and to then communicate those and take control of the situation by establishing your own boundaries. So I think that piece of decision making that we're talking about is really front and center when it comes to dealing with this time of year. Like, okay, so what is it that I really want out of this interaction or out of this, dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, or whatever it is that you feel that you need to be involved in? Why do you want to go, and what is it that you're trying to do, or what do you want to be sure to avoid, or those kinds of things? And make sure when you're entering into those situations that you have that goal absolutely crystal clear, and that everything that you're doing and saying is in service of that goal, so that you can make it through that situation in the way that you want. Yeah, so, maybe it's you want to enjoy an afternoon with your family over a meal without being drawn into an argument about religion. Okay, well, then we're going to set up the boundaries in that way, and we're going to see to that as your main goal throughout the whole interaction. Or you want to show your mom and dad that even though you no longer share their view of religion, you still love them and want to spend time with them. You can define your goals and should in the way that you want to, and then with kind of fidelity to that goal, proceed throughout the process of whatever the interaction is with that in mind.
So some of our guests have some questions that a number of them are similar to the effect of, how do you avoid or how do you deal with those comments from folks in your family who think you're being a Scrooge or a Grinch or unseasonable, or when you don't want to participate, or when you don't want to give gifts, especially when there are kids involved? How are we going to navigate those name-calling moments, those ad hominem moments?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Jen, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I would say one of the first things before you get to the specific situation about whether or not you're going to give gifts or who's going to give gifts or because even in my family, when we were all Christians, there was still like, we had 15 grandkids. There were 5, my aunts and uncles, there were 5 brothers and sisters. So there were 10 with spouses. Each family had at least 3 or 4 kids. So if you had to buy a present for everybody, that gets really expensive really fast. So some of these things aren't a religious versus non-religious thing. But I think going back to what we said a minute ago, if you have it clear in your mind what your expectations are and the things that bring you joy and happiness in celebrating a holiday, to have, if you can express that in a way so that you're stating it in a positive way to your family of, I value spending time with you more than I value giving gifts. Can I pay so that everybody goes out and goes ice skating together, or find a solution that's a positive thing rather than being the Scrooge, unless you just don't care and you want to be the Scrooge, then fine. But still communicate with your family. And don't just show up and then cause a scene on the day. Mm-hmm. Have those conversations privately and respectfully before the stress of the day is involved, before alcohol is involved, because I know a lot of people's celebrations include alcohol, and that certainly is a factor to be very wary of. But one of the things that I personally have done, and I've also seen recommended in a number of the resources that we'll discuss, that will provide you guys later, of ways that you can go through this process yourself, is think about the way that ritual and culture are important to you and to your family. Because, sure, a lot of our holidays today, Christmas and Easter are a good example, where they have a very, very strong religious overtone in the way that they're currently celebrated, especially in the United States. I know it varies very much around the world. But if any of you have done your research, which I'm sure many of you have, those used to be pagan and cultural holidays that go back to the Roman times, or even before. So one thing that I have found interesting is to understand the history of the various traditions. And I discovered that a lot of the things that my family did or did not do, because we're kind of, we're all German and English, but we don't really have any like really strong English or German traditions. Like, I had a family that I used to live next door with. They were German still, even though they were American, but also all of their Christmas traditions were very much from that culture. So finding those things that you like and maybe focusing on that rather than focusing on the things you don't want to do. By taking a more positive approach, sometimes you can head off those arguments. And then this is part of the setting boundaries, is if you know that they always go to Christmas Eve Mass and you want to avoid the fight, don't go over on Christmas Eve. So that you just can avoid the situation altogether. So there are different ways that you can approach that, that can make you feel happier in how you're being genuine in your beliefs, and also not just stepping on the way that they like it. Because that's the other side, is what's important to the family. Why is it that your grandmother always wants everybody to go to the candlelight service? Because that's just their favorite thing to do. Well, if that's the case, then go to the service and keep your mouth shut. Because you're doing it for grandma, you're not doing it for you. So you can find the motivation there. But if you're never going to step foot in a church again, then you maybe need to have a conversation with your grandma and help establish where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Hearing that boundary setting is key. And boundary setting, having the conversation up front before you get there, before everybody, there's kids underfoot, there's chaos, people are struggling with a turkey, et cetera. You want to get those convos out early, have them often, right?
Absolutely. And be very, very, very clear and keep it very simple. Mm-hmm. Bottom line of whatever it is that you're trying to convey over and over again. I'm not comfortable talking about that. I would rather not discuss it right now. I just want to enjoy our holiday together. Yeah, but no. And then you restate it. I'm not comfortable talking about that right now. I don't want to discuss it. I want to enjoy our holiday together. And then move on again. And the thing with a simple boundary like that is that just saying it, they will immediately start fighting back. Like they'll confront it, they'll push back, they'll test. They want to see what are you doing here? This is different behavior, right? So the key there is just to restate it over and over again, not angrily, but assertively, and just continue to go back to your bottom line. Yep. And then change the subject. How long have you had that puppy? You know, whatever it is.
Did you get your hair cut?
Yeah, exactly. Can you pass the salt?
No.
But yeah, having that firm boundary. And then as long as we're kind of moving toward the topic of boundaries, there is one thing that I just really want to say that I think is so important and such an important principle when setting boundaries with family members. Because there's always sort of this feeling that you have to be responsible for how they feel about it, right? Like you want to make it better, you want to make it okay, you don't want to hurt them, or you want to make them feel a certain, you know. But understand that it is not your responsibility to please or appease your family member or other people. Like you're not responsible for their emotional response to your boundary. They are. Right? So it's okay that it's uncomfortable for you. It's okay that it's uncomfortable for them. It's okay to sit there in that uncomfortableness without feeling like you got to rescue them or rescue yourself. It's that idea of like being comfortable with what's broken a little bit and just letting that sit there for a minute in service of you being true and having fidelity to your goal and who you are and how you want to be. It's hard.
I'm seeing a couple comments here that are on a theme that I think is important to address with that, of people not respecting the boundaries.
Yes.
And so one comment said they ignore every boundary I attempt to set, or if they just don't listen when you try to change the subject. This is really, you have to practice this. It's very uncomfortable, but you can just stop speaking. And just, if they keep hitting you, just either just listen and nod, and in that sense, in my head, I tried to say, I'm listening to understand their perspective, right? And if you don't want to have that fight right then, like Julia said, get comfortable with it being awkward, because they're going to feel really awkward too. And if you don't engage, they're going to have to give up at some point, right? And if they refuse to continue setting the boundaries after the event is over, approach that person and call them on it in a respectful way and say, I've repeatedly asked you to not bring this up and you keep doing this. If you choose to keep doing that, then give them a consequence. I will not be coming to the next family dinner, and you are going to have to explain to mom why I'm not there. But then you have to follow through on it. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, or find someone in the family that is more supportive of you and have them bring it up with the person, and sometimes, unfortunately, if people are refusing to respect your boundaries and are not even, they're being antagonistic about it, you need to decide how important it is for you to continue that or not. Is the rest of the family important enough for you to keep putting up with Uncle Mike? Or are you just going to have to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, especially when it comes to a situation where it's becoming traumatic, you're feeling unsafe. And this is a situation where you're feeling ganged up on, you're feeling like, because of all of the history with whoever it is and how that affects you. If you're in a spot where you're feeling like you're disrespected, you're unsafe, and they're not listening to you, time to go. Time to walk out the door. You do not have to sit and take that in the service of anybody. Your responsibility is to yourself, and it's an act of self-care and self-love to walk yourself right out the door and say no to that.
Yeah. Any implication that you have to, it's your family, families work it out regardless. There are real legitimate scenarios where your family isn't safe. And if your family isn't safe, if your family makes you feel in such a way that your personhood is in danger, and your personhood can be in danger in other ways but physical. So in those scenarios, you have to make the choice. Is it worth it for me to continue to bat at this thing that is just going to keep rising back up in my face again, or is it better for me to just take a walk?
Yeah, absolutely. And in those situations, especially, you don't owe anyone an explanation. You really don't owe anybody an explanation if you're feeling physically or emotionally threatened.
Yep. Or if there's one person in the room you do care about, pull them aside, tell them what's going on, tell them that you're leaving, and they can either stand up for you or not once you're gone. But people always have this rosy idea of, oh, it's family in the holidays, but some families are abusive and manipulative. And if you grew up in that situation, you might still have some of that baggage that you're dealing with, where you feel obligated to bend to the pressure. But part of standing up for yourself is that boundary setting, and then letting it be their problem. If the other person is causing a problem, then let it be their problem. The first thing to do, though, with that is make sure you're not contributing to it also. This takes a bit of humility and some self-awareness as well. And that's why many of the things that you'll probably hear us repeat throughout the evening are understanding where you are at, knowing what's important to you. Because and write those things down if you need to. Write yourself a list of your rights as a human being during the family holiday, or however you want to put it. And so that you have that language already in your head of how to do it before you're upset, before things get heated. And one of the other pieces of advice is, if this has happened the last couple of years and it's going to happen again, call that person tonight and talk to them about it now. Obviously Thanksgiving's this week, so if you haven't talked to your family about what your plans are for this week, it might be a little bit difficult. But you might be able to plant the seed and then see if you can maybe make some changes for Thanksgiving, for Christmas or for next Thanksgiving. It's a process. It might take time, because just as you are growing and learning more about yourself, you have to give your family time to adjust their expectations as well. And that's also a big component of this. Is it's not just your expectations, it's the expectations of every other person at that table. And you need to give them time to process their emotions the same way as you need time to process your emotions and your feelings.
Right. Absolutely. Now, how do we think that the pandemic is going to change? How is the pandemic going to make a difference? Like, for one thing, of course, if your family is doing what they ought to be doing, maybe this is a moot point this year a little bit. But what in those cases, a lot of times we're dealing with additional grief. Families, millions of people in America and around the world have died. A lot of families are grieving in the very real sense.
Yeah, so I think that's, Julie and I were talking about this the other day. I think it's kind of a twofold dichotomy here. For many people, it's giving them the out. They don't even have to have the conversation about Uncle Steve this time, because they're not going, because it's a pandemic. So for all of you people, yay, enjoy your nice quiet holiday at home if you're like me. And the idea of my closest family are 1,100 and 1,400 miles away, respectively. So it was really easy to say, no, I'm not going through 3 airports and 5.5 hours of airline travel. I can't do that. I also have asthma. I shouldn't be doing this. But there's the other side of, because the pandemic has been politicized, there is this almost, I don't want to say, well, it is irrational view of, well, I'm just doing it anyway. And I even saw a meme that got passed around of, well, this could be your last Christmas, so you should go. And my response was, let's make sure this isn't their last Christmas and stay home. So I think it's really across the board. And I think a lot of those boundary setting things that we've already talked about in general are things that can be done very specifically. If you're taking this seriously and you are going to stay home because that is what the medical experts are telling you to do, then you can just say that. And if they're upset, then you need to let them deal with that on their end.
Yeah. I think, you brought up this idea of grief in this whole scenario and situation. And I really think that this underlying idea of grief is pervasive in many different ways, not just with the pandemic and the grief that we're feeling sort of collectively about that, but specifically within families, people who have been lost or who are struggling now with, long hauler symptoms or that kind of thing. I mean, that is a very real grief that's going on at this time. But in addition to that, there's, there's a grief that comes with the boundary setting piece, right? Because you're always, you're changing the relationship again. You're changing how you're interacting, and the old ways of interacting, while maybe sometimes harmful or toxic or difficult, that was what you knew. And so there is an inherent grief in letting that go and doing it a new way. So you're situated with the pandemic grief, with that grief of the boundary making. And then if you are leaving religion and recovering from it, you also have this imbued grief in all of the loss of community, of, somebody, a belief in a God who loves and cares for you and knows you intimately, that's gone, or, ways of being in the world that are gone that were so familiar before. And that just comes into sharp focus at the holiday time with these traditions too. I was saying to Jen when we were talking about this early, I miss going to church and hearing Silent Night sung a cappella by candlelight. Like I grieve that. I miss it.
Yeah.
I can't do it anymore. So there's a lot of those pieces that are grieving pieces that are present. So my point being that with all of this, make sure that you are sort of bathing yourself as much as possible in an attitude of self-compassion, understanding what you're going through with all of this. It's huge. Like there's so much happening in these interactions right now at the holidays. So be gentle with yourself.
Right. Regardless of where your family is at it.
I think one of the things that really stood out to me in what Julia was saying is it's that I personally have also been dealing with there being a secular leader. I carry some of the emotional load of many of my members. It's not an official responsibility, but that is where my heart is at, and that is where my head is at, and that layered grief is has been very overwhelming, because I have just within my core group of volunteers and local leaders, we have lost a number of family members, not to COVID, but because of COVID, we couldn't see them. We had a very close board member and a longtime member that was basically like an adopted brother to me, that we never got to say goodbye because they weren't allowing visitors. Board members have lost parents, we've lost siblings, and so all of the normal deaths and things that people face throughout an average year, right? We're adding 250,000 more deaths on top of that. And I saw a statistic the other day that said 2.5 million Americans have lost a family member just to COVID. So that's not the heart attacks, that's not the car accidents, not, all of the other deaths that happen that are horrible. And then you add, as Julia was saying, the stress on top of that. There is a wonderful group that I would recommend for anybody that is facing any of those different types of grief. It's called Grief Beyond Belief. And I will post the link in a list of resources that I will share in a few minutes, because it's a particularly secular group, and they really get it. But one of the things that they really have been I've seen in so many posts and threads recently is, just like Julia said, is the self-care. You have to take care of yourself. And even if that means saying no, that's okay. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not want to go to Christmas because grandma's not there or your mom's not there. It's okay to give yourself an out, and to just, because it's not going to be the same. It isn't the same. And I think just recognizing that, to me, was actually a relief of saying, like, look, this is not normal. And everybody's really overwhelmed and feeling this stuff right now. We need to give ourselves a measure of compassion. And I hope that if you are in that space, and regardless of how serious your family is taking the pandemic or not, you still have the right to say no. And the other side of that is, it doesn't have to be the same as it was, because it isn't. It's okay for traditions to change and evolve. So the pandemic gives us a whole different component of talking about how can we do things differently? What's a new way of doing a tradition? What's a way of adjusting the tradition that you just really, really love and you can't do this year because of the pandemic? How could you do it differently? Or maybe you just take a break for 1 year. It's okay. And you can pick up again next year. So there's a lot of different options and coping mechanisms there, but just be kind to yourself, I think, is the thing that really has come through to me over and over again.
Yeah, that's such an important concept, and so difficult for many of us raised in fundamentalist religions, is learning how to have compassion for ourselves. So I'm going to throw another website at you too, in addition to Jen's Grief Beyond Belief. If you go to self-compassion.org, it gives you a lot of practical tips and exercise.
Okay, so I'm going to make sure that is added to the chat here, so that we can get all of our resources. Make sure that you're checking into the chat, because we are going to drop a few different links for just resource lists, websites, different ways that you can find resources during this time of year. Because even without an international pandemic and everything else going on in the world, it's still a rough time of year, even for those who willingly go through and celebrate all the things. It just happens to be one of those times of year where expectations are high, and people get really crazy. They got really intense during this time.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Julia,
so
what
here,
was the last thing you said? We didn't actually hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Now we can, but you said something while Melissa started talking and there was no sound.
I think the last thing I said was about the self-compassion website.
Okay.
Did that come through?
I'm looking to see if somebody else replies and says I can hear you.
Okay. I was just saying that learning to give ourselves self-compassion, especially those of us coming out of really kind of more strict fundamentalist types of religions where we're taught not to give ourselves any compassion at all whatsoever, learning how to do that is a process that's really necessary, especially when we're going through this time of grief, and to kind of shepherd yourself through that process by learning how to approach yourself with an attitude and with kind of this self-talk sort of mental space of self-compassion. So I was pointing out the website selfcompassion.org that has exercises and some TED Talks and podcasts and links to different ways you can start to access that self-compassion and that way of kind of, I don't know, working with yourself through the process of grief.
Mm-hmm.
Or any other process that you're dealing with, like recovering from religion.
Sure. No, all of these things require giving ourselves a little bit of space,
Absolutely.
People love a habit. People love a tradition and something that we can sort of repeat and ritualize. So finding these ways to keep these long-standing traditions is really, not everyone is looking for that. Not everybody's at a point in their atheism. Like, I know that when we were speaking a couple of days ago, you mentioned that you're not really interested in doing a whole thing every year, and that's valid too. You find that that's just not of interest to you anymore as a secular person, it's fine.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because Jen and I, we were talking about that at our last, when we were meeting to talk about this, and she was talking about some of the ways that she's rewritten her traditions and how she expresses them, what she referred to earlier. And I found myself feeling like, yeah, I did that for a time, and now I just really don't feel like doing anything at the holidays. Like, I'm done.
Fine,
As an
we grow and change.
Like for me right now, this is the space I'm in where I'm just not going to do anything. And I'm good with that. So that's okay.
Yeah. So let's, since we're on that, let's hit on that for a second. So one of the things that I personally did was, first of all, I never challenged participating in any of my family's ongoing Christmas traditions.
No.
Being far away, and when we were younger, money was an issue. So if mom and dad didn't buy us a plane ticket, we couldn't go. So it really kind of answered itself. And so for many years, that was our Christmas present, was a plane ticket to go visit. Now, Jeremy's parents, my husband, they live in Florida. So we tended to go down there pretty regularly because he has a college schedule because he teaches. So we would have several weeks off. And I too, with event planning, we never did anything between our solstice dinner and after the new year because people are busy with family stuff. And so, when they moved to Florida, they used to live in Illinois, so it was a 3-hour drive. So of course we would go, and then we would see my parents in Colorado whenever we could. But his mom was way more into Christmas than my parents were. She really got into the decorating, and it was a really big deal for her. And so, I've actually been a part of that family since I was 12. And so I was still a kid basically when I was first introduced to their family. So it was more of a continuing of the childhood traditions. Some of them changed a little bit. But, when we go to their house, we just do their tradition. At home, after a few years, we stopped putting up the tree because the cats kept knocking all the ornaments on the ground, and I was really tired of sweeping up glass. So we just didn't do a tree for 10 years. And so, but it was just fine because it was just us, and we were hardly ever home around that time of the year. But recently I've been, finding more reasons to have my own traditions. And the one that really resonates with me is the winter solstice and the summer solstice, because I get seasonal depression. So the winter solstice is really important to me because it means the days are getting longer. There will be more sunlight soon, and it's gonna be okay. And so for me, I would start posting more things about that. And I looked up a lot of the winter holiday traditions, holiday feasts and all of that stuff, especially from Northern Europe and Scandinavia and all these places. A lot of what people that I know think of as Christmas, it goes actually way thousands of years beyond Christianity and, Catholicism, deciding that December 25th was Christmas, because in the Roman calendar, the winter solstice was December 25th. That's why it got put on that date originally. And once I realized that, it's okay, I can think about this as a time of renewal and of going into the new year. And over the course of time, my mother apparently paid attention to this, and she has started calling me on the solstice and wishing me a happy solstice. And of course, I still call her on Christmas and wish her a Merry Christmas because that's what she wants to do. So there's ways that, and now that took time though, but there's ways that you can make small changes each year that can help put you on the path that you want to be. And that's actually a coping mechanism that I've seen. I have a couple books I'm going to hold up real quick because people might find these useful as you're thinking about how you want to do your own traditions. This is a rather hefty one, but this is, if you really want to get into this is called Rituals for Our Times, Celebrating Healing and Changing Our Lives and Our Relationships. And it's by Evan Ember Black and Janine Roberts. I will put the link to that in the resources, but they really address how much rituals are essential to our understanding of ourselves, both individually and developmentally. This is the way that we mark time. That's part of the reason why human society and human culture has been so successful, is because we have this marking of time and these rites of passage and annual and daily traditions and all of these different things where, you know, if you start thinking about rituals, traditions as a ritual in that sense, it can be more fulfilling to you as on an individual level rather than having to do the thing because of your parents' religion.
Sure.
And the more bite-sized version of that is Sasha Sagan, who is the daughter of Carl Sagan, was actually featured on one of our Skeptical Inquirer Presents earlier, wrote this book last year, For Small Creatures Such as We. And she breaks it down in here of having daily, weekly, monthly, and annual rituals and how you can make those part of your life. And of course, you know, traditions like Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter and those types of things are in there as well. But it's a really nice, easy way to really think through it from a non-religious perspective. And if you can have that language and have that conversation with your family about how you value things and how this is important to you, and invite them to share what's most important to them about the holidays, you can use that to find some common ground and make a new tradition that maybe can both help with grief and healing. Because one of the reasons why rituals are important is they can actually help us heal. They can unfortunately still cause division too, but if you can use that as a healing process or as a way to grow and to build understanding, everybody will be better off in the end.
Truly. So I was wondering, we have a couple of questions here that I know it's maybe a little bit out of order, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, which is these coming out moments. What do we say to relatively new atheists or atheists who come from families who don't they can't accept it? There's a question here that asks specifically about family members where, say it's your mother, you tell them you're an atheist, they're like, what? How can this be? What do you believe in if not these things that I believe in? You know, what do you say to those people? What is a canned answer that can shut mom down?
Oh, is that the question? How to shut someone down?
Yeah, like when you have these relatives that just won't take it. They're just like, nope, you can't, because that doesn't make sense to me personally.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you just go back to your boundaries and you just say, well, this is my truth and this is what it is, and I'm not interested in arguing about it, and I really would like not to discuss it further. And if that can't be honored, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave if it gets to that point, and then do it, and then change the subject right after you drop your truth. So how's it going for you with your new whatever you've got going on? You know, really stating your truth, dropping it simply, insisting on it, and changing the subject. And when they come back to it again, do exactly the same thing with exactly the same wording and change the subject again. And just repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat.
Right.
There's no reason to be drawn into the argument. You're not going to win, and expecting them to come over to your way of thinking is not going to happen.
Right.
So just be firm in your truth and what it is, and state it simply, and insist on changing the subject.
Well, and one of the ways you can hopefully maybe avoid a situation like that occurring is deciding ahead of time what you are willing to disclose. For some people, their secular beliefs may not be public or may not be known to all family members. So there's a coming out aspect to this as well. So no wonder everybody gets stressed at the holidays, right? We're talking about layers of grief. We're talking about personal identities. We're talking about, right? The state of the universe, everything. So,
right, absolutely. I
think some of the same things for coming out apply here. Decide how much you are going to share. Decide when it is safe to share. Have the conversation in advance, well in advance, so that you know that they have time to get adjusted to the idea. It's probably not a good idea to come out as an atheist at the Christmas dinner table.
Absolutely.
When everybody else is really devout. It's not going to go over well. The same way as you shouldn't announce that your relationship isn't going so well and you guys are going to be getting a divorce also is probably not good timing. So, you know, use your judgment here, but at the same time, like Julia is saying, don't take the bait.
Right.
If you can stay calm, stay matter of fact, and have that script ready, Uncle Steve, I'd like to enjoy my Christmas day and my time with the family. How about, you know, or offer to discuss it at a different date, maybe. Say, I'd really like to not get that into the day, but I would love to talk to you about that at a different time when we can focus on that subject better, or something like that, you know. And each person is, their level of comfort level is different. You know, some people love having like 2-hour arguments at the dinner table. Mm-hmm. My family, that is not a good idea.
If you're that person, own it.
Just sure.
That person.
Yeah.
There's, you know, we all have that person in our.
But the expectation was that person was not happy with that idea, right? So, but just as you would in a coming out situation in general, whether it's your religious beliefs or LGBTQ, you make sure you are safe first. If you feel that actually voicing what you truly believe will put you in either psychological or physical danger, then simply don't say it. I know it feels gross and you feel like you're not being honest, but it's okay. Greta Christina made a great point about this in her Coming Out Atheist book, and specifically directed at younger people who are atheists. If you are not physically safe, you don't have a place to live or income other than with your parents or the person that you're actually, you know, thinking of coming out to, then don't do it. Absolutely. You know, yeah. So use your judgment. And as much as you would love to tell Steve that you don't believe that in God or hell or Satan or whatever, and he can just go whatever himself, you know, you still have to stick around for dessert. So maybe not.
Yeah. And as a trained social worker, like, I really, really want to underscore what Jen just said about if there's any potential for loss of housing, transportation, food, access to your higher education, emotional support, if that is going to be or could possibly at all, or your marriage could be at risk in coming out, wait and get a plan for those things in place and then proceed carefully.
Absolutely.
Yep. And so if you can't say it publicly, write it down in a book somewhere, write it down in a journal, get those thoughts out, get those emotions out so that you can process them, so that you're not caught off guard in those situations.
Another approach to coming out is not making a grand statement or a grand gesture. This is kind of how I did it, is just to simply stop editing yourself. Not making a specific statement about something, but just simply making a post about, you know, secular humanism, or just not engaging in, you know, not praying anymore at these, you know, at family dinner. You know, just subtle, small thing.
What do you do when everybody expects you to bow your head in prayer and you got that auntie who's like, well, now we're going to say grace, you know,
you just sit there.
You just live your truth.
You just sit there.
You just
sit there.
And like my family likes to hold hands.
Yeah.
So I hold hands. I don't.
Just hold hands.
It's to me at that moment. Yeah, it's a respect thing.
Yeah.
If you're in, it's like a host guest thing. If you're at someone else's house, their house rules, right?
Right.
You know, we were taught this as little kids, right? If they take off the shoes at the door, you take off your shoes, right? If they want to hold hands and pray, you pray. Now, if they want to put you on the spot and ask you to pray,
nope,
that's not cool. Or the one thing you can do is have something ready. I actually have several lists of secular graces and non-prayers, or what we call them invocations, usually not. So you don't have to use those religiously loaded terms. So you can either politely decline, or you can have something ready, pull it up on your phone, not say God once, and they're never going to ask you again.
Yeah.
Or maybe they'll be like, well, that was really great, and, and that'll give you an opportunity to, but it's one of those things, you got to be prepared. I think I've got a couple links to those. I'll pop over there. So if you like to have a secular grace, you can do that. I, as a secular leader, started doing this a number of years ago because it still felt weird at our big annual dinner it felt like we needed like something to like start, right? Like there's this weird cultural thing that whoever's the host gets up and says, thanks for coming, cheers, a toast, something. So I did some research and I found several that I really like and I keep on hand that I rotate through every couple of years. And I almost inevitably, I always have at least a handful of people at the end saying, where did you find that, right? So there are alternatives that you can do if you like that part of the tradition, even and you're hosting the holiday and you still want to have that there. There's options.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I really also want to underscore this idea of respect for their belief system. Like the fact that I'm a secular humanist does not mean that I feel the need to convert my entire family over to that. They can believe how they want to believe. To the extent where it's not hurting me in any way, then okay, I'll go to your dinner and we'll bow our head. You'll bow your heads,
and I'll think of baseball or whatever.
Oh, we lost Julia's audio again.
Oh no. Oh, Julia. Oh no, we lost you completely.
In some sort of,
Oh,
their evangelical sort of stance where I'm trying to get them to believe like me or an
hey,
argument.
Julia, hold on a sec. We lost you for a minute there. Can you back up?
Yep. Okay. I don't know where I stopped.
It was right after you started, actually.
Oh, okay. I think I just wanted to underscore the idea of respect for other people's belief systems. Like the fact that I'm a secular humanist does not lead me to want to tear apart other people's religious belief structures, because I know from my work, I guess, I know what kind of devastating process that can be. So I'm not interested in pulling all of my family through that if that's not where they're at, right? So I'm not going to start that argument. I'm just going to keep the peace and enjoy my family. So that means when they pray, I look down and wait till they're done, and then we move on. And that's kind of how I handle those moments at our dinner, our family dinner table.
I don't close my eyes around my head anymore. I used to. But it's interesting if you keep your eyes open, who else you find around the table that sometimes doesn't have their eyes closed,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Peekers. It's usually like the children with me, like curiously peeking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first converted,
when I would do that, I would wink at them.
I was just saying the same thing on Sunday morning at the grocery store. After I first deconverted and like had all that freedom of Sunday mornings, I would go to the grocery store and be like, all these people aren't in church. This is awesome. You're one too.
We have a group here in Michigan that one of the gentlemen decided he wanted to have a discussion group on Sunday mornings because he was free, and his wife still went to a very, very liberal church here. It's like even like left of the Unitarians. But he would drive her, they live about 45 minutes away, so he would drive her to church and then have to hang out for 2 hours. So he started an event. And then they were giving me a hard time for not going. And I'm like, that's why I don't have to get up on Sundays. Like I told you, I didn't want to run this event because I have my Sundays off. Like that's part of the point. It's like one of the bonus. Anyway,
I had one more thought, an example that I want to share about the prayer thing. And this relates to my kids when they were younger. They would be this is terrible. And I used to work at the ACLU, so this really grinds me, but there would be like prayer situations in the public school setting. And especially on my son's baseball travel team, where each kid would be tapped to say the prayer before the game. And my kids were secular, so they didn't have any sort of understanding of how to pray in front of a group. So we taught them a formula, and it was, Dear Jesus, thank you for blank, fill in the blank, keep us safe, amen. That's what you say. done. So we just kind of gave them the formula because they're little kids and they're not going to, this is not something that they're going to be drawn into like a discussion about, right? Like you do the prayer, you move on, you play your ball game. But the fact that they had to do that is a whole other issue, but they had to get through that moment. So we just kind of taught them the formula for it. Say the formula, move on.
Even Girl Scouts, right? I am a grown-up Girl Scout, and I have been a Girl Scout leader and a Girl Scout camp counselor, Girl Scout camp. Even as progressive as Girl Scouts are, there's still grace before every meal at Girl Scout camp. And it's not really like a Jesus grace, but some of them kind of are. And it's definitely one of those situations, especially for kids, you know, in Girl Scouts, they tend to be a little bit, you know, you get all sorts. So it would still be shocking when I would come across that. And coming across it, having been a public school teacher as well, these issues where, you know, in our Q&A, one person was saying that their kid's school is saying that like part of prayer was a part of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving's a religious holiday. The pilgrims thanked God, et cetera, which does come up. A lot of folks who are teachers make that a part of their Thanksgiving spiel that they give. Mm-hmm. What are you doing when it's coming from sources like that? How do we take it from those places of higher authority?
I mean, in a public school setting, my go-to is you file a complaint with the ACLU because that's a separation of church and state issue, straight up.
Sure.
Well, I mean, you can also start with just talking to the teachers directly and making sure that they're being balanced about it first. But you know, but I know how those conversations usually tend to go. So, but one thing with that you could actually do is offer a secular alternative. So one of the things that I have found with the interfaith work that we do, rather than being like poo-poo on their beliefs, just say, oh, have you ever considered that it might be more inclusive if you were to use something like this, and have something ready that you give them as a positive replacement, right? This is a trick that you use with kids all the time, right? To instill better habits. Either you incentivize it, or, you know, if you're trying to get rid of a bad habit, you replace it with a good one. Don't just leave the hole, right? Don't just say you shouldn't do that. It's, you know, that's against separation of church or state. On some of those links that Melissa posted for you, you will find there are several different, and ones to choose from. Thanksgiving is actually a really good one because, yes, there's the whole Puritan and the prayer and all that element, but you don't have to get into Jesus Christ and his birthday and all of that stuff, you know. So Thanksgiving might be one where you could even offer that you have a nice invocation that you like to give, and provide that before the prayer thing even happens. You know, maybe that you do that and then they pray still, but like at least you got to include your part. When I did this for the Interfaith Thanksgiving service that we do here in West Michigan, many years, I've rewritten this several times. But I actually, the last time I did it, I have a whole secular thanks that I have made, and I turned it into a responsive reading. And I invited people to say, for this we give thanks, you know, is kind of like a responsive reading, because, you know, as atheists, we don't have a liturgy to draw from of readings and different things. And I actually, it shocked me how loud everybody was in response to the for this we give thanks the first time it happened, because I expected like a few people to be like, okay, well, we'll do the thing that the atheist is telling us to do. But like, they really got into it, and everybody was like, that was wonderful. And from Mormons and Muslims and rabbis coming up to me, and imams, you know, saying, hey, that was really great. I had several like pastors ask me for the text. I'm like, okay. So it's one of those things that, you know, if you can provide a positive alternative, you might find that people are more accepting than you expect. Or your dad might still be an asshole. So, you know, but you tried, right?
There's always one uncle, and sometimes your dad is the uncle.
Nope. Yeah. My grandfather will just argue in circles. And so, I mean, we all learned many years ago that you just don't start a fight with grandpa, but you know, it's one of those things that, but you have to like choose to put that boundary into place rather than, you know, taking the bait. So, you know, because he would sit there and egg people on, like on purpose, you know, and he was like some people were saying earlier about not respecting the boundaries and just really pushing it. So, you know, maybe make sure you're not sitting next to grandpa. I don't know.
Right. Well, you know what? My family does this thing where there's this sort of like exile section for if you feel the need to compulsively talk about politics or what have you, they'll put you outside where people go to, you know, smoke and cool off, etc. So if you have something to say about current affairs, that's where you must go.
That's
fantastic. To the
fantastic.
exile zone.
I love that.
So it keeps
like
it
that.
out of everybody. And those people who need it, some people need it. Some people are that person. It's fine. Be that person.
Yeah.
But they have a quarantined little special place to go to do it. Not a bad plan, if you ask me. Does, let me see here. So there are a lot of questions about, yeah, a lot of questions seem to be about finding those, dealing with those struggling, those folks who are really struggling with your identity. Now, that's not your particular problem, is it? Do you have to solve everybody's feelings about you?
Absolutely.
No, you shouldn't. But if they're genuinely trying to understand, you can choose to engage them. If they're bringing it up so that they can attack you, you're going to have to make that distinction and choose your battles, right? It's pretty much the same thing with anything: politics, religion, what color your hair should be, long, you know, there's a lot of different, you know, cultural things, right? And so it comes down to the boundaries again. So if you think that your aunt is really actually just trying to understand your perspective, that's actually a really great thing. You don't want to shut that down, but maybe during dinner is not great because you think that your aunt could have a good conversation with you, but right on the other side of her is someone that you think is going to immediately start preaching at you the second you bring up anything having to do with being secular or atheist or any of that stuff. So this is where having what you are comfortable with ready beforehand, so that you can say, you know what, I'm really glad that you're asking about that. I mean, it means a lot to me that you want to understand where I'm coming from. You know, can we maybe talk about that a little bit more after dinner when we can have a little bit more space to discuss that? And if they really are being respectful, then they probably will have absolutely no problem. Oh yeah, sure, you know, or give them like a really quick answer and say, I could explain, but it's you know, that's about a 15-minute conversation, and I think maybe not a good dinner conversation. Oh, okay. You know, or could we get coffee? Okay, when it's safe to get coffee again.
Yeah, Jen, that is a beautiful example of boundarying up that conversation and retaining control over a situation that may make you feel unsafe. And fostering understanding within that context. Yeah. Really, really good example. I love that.
And you had a comment that you had made. I don't know if it came up tonight, but I know it came up the other day in our planning meeting. Was you can take control of the conversation by asking them questions, right?
Absolutely.
So you answer their question, but then turn it around so that it's not focused as an attack on you. Say, I find that I really find honesty and whatever to be really important, you know, ethical guideposts for myself. Because if they're bringing up something about, oh, if you're an atheist, you don't believe anything, you know, redirect it again to the positive and say, I know that's something that you must find to be really important as well. Like, you know, how does that play out in your, you know, in your belief system?
Yes.
You know, because some of this stuff is very, you know, almost Socratic in a way, if you can train yourself to be ready for that. So, and part of not taking the bait is also part of that, you know, either don't answer or say, what does Christmas mean to you? or different things like that when you have an opportunity to have those conversations.
Right, absolutely. I'm also being asked here about where newly gone clear, I suppose, atheists can find that sense of community, especially around this time of year where we're needing to be with people a little bit. I feel like our human needs are flaring up in a big, wild way. Where do we find that sense of community?
Well, I think that's partly what we are trying to do with the branch programming. So here, I'll give a local example, and then I'll give an example of where people can look for other beliefs, other beliefs, look for other groups to find people who share your beliefs. So in Michigan, we have a fairly extensive network of members across the entire state. Now, one thing that I've learned as a leader, as I've gotten more experience, is you really can't have a statewide community, but you can have a statewide network to connect people so they can find the people close to them geographically and connect with each other. This used to be a lot harder before we had the internet and social media and stuff like that, where you basically had to find an in-person group. But luckily, there are a plethora of groups online. Google keyword searches are your best friends. Search atheist, humanist, and group. Search there's the Ethical Union is another one that you can use. Go to Center for Inquiry's website. You can what's the link, Melissa? There's a map that has all the group affiliations. Or maybe find it and post it.
centerforinquiry.org/about/locations.
/locations. Okay.
I'm dropping it right now.
Yay. And there are other secular organizations: American Atheists, American Humanist Association, Freedom from Religion Foundation, that all have different affiliate programs. A lot of groups are cross-affiliated. We don't make people only pick one. And also, any college kids out there, check your student group listings. Same thing, look for free thinker, humanist, agnostic, atheist, secular, all of those keywords. I'm sure you'll find something. There are also completely online groups. Meetup, Facebook are really good places to search for that. And there's a lot of smaller groups, and pretty much everybody I know is doing events all virtually right now because we're staying safe to not expose people during the pandemic. And I know that is not the same thing as in-person connection, and I feel it too. Just hang in there. See if you can maybe start making some connections and already, start to feel out who you kind of have a connection to with people who are posting in those groups now. And then you can help get more involved in events once it's safe to do so again. So in Michigan, what we launched, we actually had this in the works before the pandemic started, but because we know that everybody was going to be isolated, we actually built regional, what we were calling community hubs. And so there's one for each kind of geographic area of the state. Anybody who lives in that state, that part of the state, and considers themselves secular can join. So you are from Michigan, CFIMichigan.org, and there are, or go to, the Facebook page, facebook.com/CFIMI, and go to our group section. They're all connected to our main page, so you can find the one near you. And then there's also like the more general groups like Grief Beyond Belief, and there are some other just more national atheists and agnostic groups that, again, it's not a replacement for in-person, but it's at least something to help you get connected. And it's a place to vent and find people that can give you advice, especially if you're new to this. And you're also welcome to message me or Melissa. I mean, our job is to help support our members. That's part of what we do is outreach. We also have, if you're like looking to start a group, it's not super hard now these days, but it is quite a bit of work. So that's an option too. If you really can't find one near you, email me or Melissa. We've got years of experience doing this, and we can at least help you get headed in the right direction.
Let me tag on a couple of other groups for folks who may be in the recovery process, who are looking for support there. Recovery from Religion has online support groups all over the country. And so if you go to recoveryfromreligion.org, I believe, you can find a link to some of those groups that you can participate in. So I can't say enough good about CFI. I mean, they just have become my community post-religion, you know, and I miss them terribly here in Nashville. So I've had to kind of cobble together community being here. So I found that Sunday Assembly is a big deal here. If you're not familiar, it's kind of this atheist church concept where their focus is community and then community participation and helping out folks in the community. But that's been helpful here, although church is triggery for me. So I kind of have to take that kind of at a step back. But that's another good one. And then if you're looking for therapists, this is an issue for a lot of folks who are going through the recovery process. I'll just slide this in, but there's a secular therapy network that Recovery from Religion runs. And so all of these therapists are vetted. We go through this vetting process to make sure that they're using evidence-based therapies and that sort of thing. So you can look online for at that directory. There's a directory there that you can look for a secular therapist if you're in need of that. The other one that's newer is called Reclamation Collective, and they also have a secular therapy directory there. So those are some helpful resources in that direction.
Julia, was that SMART Recovery? SMART? SMART?
No, that's Recovery from Religion has the Secular Therapy Network, and then Reclamation Collective is out of Minneapolis, and it also has a therapy listing, therapist listing. Smart Recovery is a non-religious alternative to AA for anybody. Just since you mentioned it.
Yeah, I was going to say that is a good resource actually as well.
Program.
And SOS as well.
Yeah. Yep. So.
Yeah. So yeah, we did have a couple of questions about. I'm sorry, Julia, we didn't hear you just then.
No, I didn't say anything. I don't think. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think I said.
Yeah, SOS. Oh no.
Oh, go ahead, Melissa. She was done.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. I got nothing at the moment, so go ahead.
No. So I just wanted to put the request out there if anybody else had any questions or anything that you wanted to discuss or share, any tips or thoughts that you might have that have helped you survive a holiday as a secular person, especially maybe when you were newly secular and trying to go to family events and live to tell the tale. Now is definitely the time to think those thoughts, send them our way. I'm going to continue dropping a couple of resources here in the chat just to touch all the bases that we've discussed this evening. So
Melissa, that reminded me of an email that actually was sent in to us before the event with a question was, what are alternatives to religious holiday celebrations like Christmas? And she was specifically asking because it sounds like this is a newly deconverted person who has a 6-year-old. So how do you explain it to the 6-year-old? And I think that one of the great suggestions that I would recommend for newly deconverted people or people with children is turn it into an exploratory process, right? Take all of the traditions you can think of for whatever holiday that you are looking at, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, and look up all of the different traditions around the world. And then try stuff, see what you like, see what you don't, and make it like a learning and an exploration process. It doesn't have to be well, mommy's not religious anymore, so we can't celebrate Christmas, because Even from our own statistics within the secular movement, like 80% of atheists still celebrate Christmas because, especially for many people in America, it is a pretty secular holiday in the overall trappings. Of course, there's still the religious services and baby Jesus and nativities and all of that stuff, but Santa Claus and all of those things, that came from Yuletide paganism, and that was around way before the whole Judeo-Christian thing even got started. And so you can find, I found it really interesting just to explore those things and find the little pieces of all of these different cultures that had been all squished together into what we now think of Christmas. And remember, Santa Claus in the red suit, we didn't have that until Coca-Cola decided that that was a thing in one of their commercials a couple decades ago. So, cultures change, traditions change, find the stuff that works for you and have fun with it. I've been doing some of this re-exploration myself because one of the biggest things I look forward to every year is our solstice dinner. There's 150 people that come to the two different dinners that we do on two sides of the state. Half of them I only see at that dinner because that's their thing that they really enjoy. And so originally we were talking about not doing it. And then I decided, no, I'm not okay with that. We're still doing something. And so I was trying to think, how can I translate some of the things that we usually do in person to a virtual space? And sure, it takes some creativity, but there's a lighting ceremony that I'm going to have people do that comes out of the Yule tradition that really just hit me. It's basically a Thanksgiving way of expressing Thanksgiving, as each person takes the time to light a candle and share something significant about their year or what they're looking forward to in the next year. And I thought that's what I need right now. And I hope that the other attendees will enjoy it as well. And actually, anybody who's joining us tonight is welcome to join us because it's virtual. If you go to cfimichigan.org and /solstice 2020, you can find out the details there. And we're actually even using it as a little bit of a fundraiser for our local programming because it's been a rough year for nonprofits as well as it has been for other people with funding and job losses and things like that. And since meeting on Zoom is free, we're inviting people to donate what they would have bought for the tickets to CFI Michigan instead, because if you do drink, alcohol's way cheaper at home. So you can shoot a couple more bucks over to CFI and help make sure that we can keep doing what we're doing for many years to come. So there's lots of options. You just have to be creative with it.
Absolutely. I wanted to thank our guests, Jennifer and Julia, for joining us this evening. And I wanted to thank all of you who took the time during what is a busy and stressful time of year to spend this evening with us, talking and comparing notes and learning a little bit about how to make this time just a little bit more survivable. So I hope that all of you have a very happy, healthy and safe holiday season, no matter how you choose to celebrate them. And we hope that you consider supporting CFI, in particular CFI Michigan, who brought us this wonderful morsel of programming for this evening. Thank you and have a fantastic rest of your night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bye-bye.